Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth, August 11th, 2021. This is episode 121. As always, today's episode is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory tasted game time, there is only one G Vegas, available at www.gvegas.webs.com. I'm a big guy. I love a good buffalo sauce. What I love more than that is comedy. On the phone, I have a Boston comedy legend who goes way back to the famous Ding Ho Chinese food restaurant days of comedy. Seen on the best damn sports show, period, with Tom Arnold. We got Mike Donovan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being on, Mike. Gosh, you've done so much in comedy. I don't know where to start, but I guess the beginning's a good spot. But you're a graduate of what? UMass Amherst College. My son went there, so congratulations. But how did you get started in comedy?
Well, I dropped out of UMass after one semester. At least I got there. But I got started in comedy by doing impressions and making sure there was always a joke in there. It didn't take too much brains to watch the good impressionists. I feel that people, you get 50 points out of 100 just for trying. People love impressions. Just that you're trying to impersonate someone, people smile and perk up. So even a mediocre impression really will usually work with a crowd, as long as it's not horrible.
Right. Who are some of your impressions you did?
Gomer Pyle, John Wayne.
Right.
Listen, Sockbuster, that's my steak balance.
John Wayne.
There's a whole bunch. I did Lyndon V. Johnson, my fellow Americans. The grave crisis is at hand. The United States of America has experienced great tragedy. Linda Bird is pregnant. So you just slip in a little joke and, cartoons, Yogi Bear. I had Yogi Bear smoking weed, and that bit I still do that one. So I wrote that bit when I was 15, and I'm 66.
You can still use it.
It's a 50-year-old bit that still works word for word. So I'm proud of that.
The classics never die. There you go. So says you were a graduate of the the Academy School of Broadcasting in 1973. Then you started.
Career Academy. It was located in the building of Fenway Park, where the bowling alley was at the corner. There was a bowling alley on the ground floor, and above that was the Career Academy School of Broadcasting. But it was an interesting way I got into it. My father was pestering. I knew I wanted to be a comedian, and originally I used to hook school and go to WMEX in Boston. I'd take my bicycle. I'd go to WMEX in Boston, and I'd hang out with the DJs. I'd be a gopher. I'd go out and get them coffee. I was fascinated. I was totally into wanting to be a disc jockey. Mm-hmm. And then I changed my mind, and I decided I wanted to be a comedian. But I didn't want to tell anyone. I had confidence. I never had any doubt that I could do it. But I didn't want to tell anyone. I just wanted to just do it when the time came.
What made you change your mind, do you think? What made you...
From being raised, I think I got addicted to the Bill Cosby albums and the George Carlin albums.
Right.
Just hearing the sound of that, go, well, that's magic. That's something I'd like to do.
You played them over and over and over again, right?
I had it in memory. Wonderful, I know more. It's more often. Why not time? Think about 5 minutes after the big hour of 5 o'clock. I could just do it for people. I would actually perform George Carlin bits for my friends. I wouldn't perform Bill Cosby bits because it's more of a conversational thing. I just sit there and just be fascinated and enjoy them.
Right.
But I think the medium large crowd was part of the appeal, which is part of why I don't particularly like albums when there's 20,000 people cheering for everything the guy says. You're kind of upstaging the audience.
Right.
The audience that's listening to your recording is like, well, you're not even giving me any room to really laugh because the crowd is going berserk on everything you say, and this is the album that you chose to record. Okay, but for me, it doesn't work that way. But with these early '70s albums, they were usually recorded in a nightclub with about 300-400 people, which is not too big. You can still hear the people. You can still hear, the individual laughs. You can still hear them, the tinkling of the glasses.
They're not cheering for the person; they're cheering for the jokes, right?
That's exactly right.
There you
So,
go.
and I've told people, you have any advice? I'm going to record an album. I said, don't record the greatest show you ever made. Record a very good show. Give the audience that's listening to the recording some room to take the lead in laughter.
Sure.
You can be drowned out by how great the guy is doing, and you're not really listening to it as a pure listener.
Right.
So anyway, that was those two albums. There was one called Revenge by Bill Cosby, and AM and FM by George Carlin. I got addicted to those two albums. I couldn't. It's like an old Beatles album. You can't wear it out.
Right. Those are the ones that inspired you to do what you want to do. Back when you could make a comedy album, now with the free downloading, they don't even put them out anymore because you can't make any money off them.
Right.
It's a tough time, but so after you graduated that, you were a top 40 DJ at WEKT-FM in Hampton Sports, New York.
Yeah, Hammondsport in Bath, New York. Wonderful to Benton County.
What do you remember from those days of being a DJ?
What's that?
What do you remember from those days of being a DJ?
Well, it was for a guy to be 19 years old and have the complete creative control over his program was a lucky break. It was a moderate salary, but it wasn't, college station. It was commercial radio.
Right.
But the guys that hired me wanted me to be wacky and wild and do whatever I wanted. So I had complete control, and I had a lot of fun. I had character stuff, but I could work at impressions. But they sold the station, and there was two stations. There was I did country and western on Sunday. I pretend I was a country guy, and then I'd have people call in. I had plans, so I'd call, you're not from the country, you're from Boston. Who are you trying to kid? All these running gags.
Hop along, Mike.
Yeah, they laid off the FM station. And so I was, and just a bizarre coincidence, my first paid show was the very next night. I got laid off on a Thursday, and my first paid show ever was the very next night. It was already scheduled, so it was just it was just meant to be.
Do you remember what you got paid? What was paid back then for a comic?
I got paid. They said I had a door deal, and I was getting half the door. I had done an audition on December 7th, 1973, and I really did great. It was a biker bar. It was a pretty tough place. Yeah. And they loved all the weed jokes. I connected. And they said, let's have you come down. They were like, they weren't talent scouts, but they were just a bunch of guys that owned a bar. And they said, this guy's great. Let's put him up. And there weren't any comedy clubs. So it was a bold move for them to say, let's set up a night for you and have you do a whole, and I had an hour and a half of material.
Well, that's when you know you're a good comic. Any guy can make someone who paid $20 to see a comedy show laugh, but you hit a biker bar where nobody's expecting comedy and you can make them laugh, you really won over a crowd there, right?
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly right. It gave me a lot of confidence for a long time. Right. And and everybody had warned me how rough show business was, and so they gave me $24, which, in 1974 it's more like $60, $70 at the time. I was getting about, I cleared about $100 after taxes as a DJ. So the $24 was okay. Yeah. And I was like happy with it. It was my first paid gig.
Right.
And then they called me up the next day and said, there was a misunderstanding. I said, what? They said, you were entitled to the whole door. Why don't you come on down to the bar? And I walked down to the bar, and the guy's washing dishes. He kicks the door open. Hey, here's your other $24. Yeah. I'm like, well, that's a pretty good deal, that there was this honesty thing going on.
Yeah, you don't see that every day. Yeah, wow.
So then I got a hell gig at a place called the Bathtub, where there was a stripper. It was a classic. It was like an old Jay Leno story where I'm doing sets in between the strippers, and I eventually got a glass thrown at me. No one was listening, and this glass smashes against the brick wall behind me on stage. Oh, suddenly you can hear a pin drop in the room. And everyone's like, what's he going to say now? And I said, well, whoever threw the glass, you want to talk to me outside, And I'm not really a tough guy, but I knew I lived in that town. And I couldn't just look like a pussy. Right. I had to do something. And then this friend of mine, I found out later, he never had a fight in his life. And he jumped in and said, leave the guy alone. And he was ready this guy was trying to pick a fight with me after the show. You think you're so tough, huh? You want to start a fight with me? What if I threw the glass? And then this guy jumped in and just got in the way and was ready to take on this famous tough guy. And it turned out later, he had never had a fight in his life. So that was a wonderful human moment for me to find that it was true friendship.
Yeah, if he's going to back you up and he never fought, that's a good friend right there. Wow. But those are the stories you remember in comedy, where the rough nights, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, you can have 100 shows in a row that go great, and one that you're going to remember is the night somebody came up and said, that was the most offensive show I ever saw. Someone should wash your mouth out with soap. It's like, Jesus Christ, you know, give me a break. We're trying to have fun.
Every night's different. That's half the fun. If every night was the same, it would lose interest. Yeah, every crowd's different. Every night's different.
But let me go back to the story about how I got to be a disc jockey, because my father said to me, what do you want to do with the rest of your life, Michael? I said, well, I don't want to talk about it. Do you want to be a disc jockey? I know you used to want to be a disc jockey. And I said, yeah. So that was a seminal moment when I lied to him and said, yeah, because I just wanted to get him off my back.
Right.
So then without me knowing it, he filled out an application for broadcasting school and sent it into the mail. And I had quit my job at a factory. I was working in a factory. And I walked off. I had an argument with the boss. I walked home. And this guy calls me up at home. It's 3 o'clock. And I'm usually not home. And I said, I'm from Career Academy. I'm from the Career Academy School of Broadcasting. And I went, well, I didn't fill that out. That must be some kind of a joke. He says, okay, sorry to bother you. And he's about to hang up I'm about to hang up the phone. He's about to hang up the phone. I pulled the phone back. I go, hey, wait a minute. I just quit my job. Tell me more. Next thing you know, I'm going to the Career Academy School of Broadcasting.
So it worked out for you.
Yeah, so if I hadn't lied to my father and said, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I'm going back into radio, but I was kind of a left-wing hippie. I didn't want anything to do with commercials and commercial radio at the time. And so one of the things that I was doing better at was producing commercials. I was getting a reputation. They were like, how did this happen? I'm a left-wing guy. I'm against commercial. I want to go. There was an expression, go commercial. Don't go commercial. And I was like into that, not going commercial. Next thing you know, I'm a DJ, and I'm getting a reputation. I'm making money on the side, making humorous commercials for the radio. And I'm like, how did this happen? And so then I got laid off. And I was like, well, that settles that. People say you should stick with radio. And I said, no, I want to be a comedian. So then I moved to New York City, and I did open mics for about a year and a half.
What was your big break in New York that turned you into a full-time comic?
I didn't get a break. I just did a lot of open mics. I got a lot of experience, but I never got discovered. And then I hitchhiked to Los Angeles, and I tried to get discovered out there. I was sleeping in doorways for a couple of weeks, homeless shelters, painting houses.
So you paid your dues.
What's that? Yeah,
you paid your dues, man. Yeah. Okay.
And then I went to Austin, Texas for a couple of months, and I got a little bit of a start there, a place called the Hole in the Wall. And it's a legendary bar, and I was a weekly comedian. Every Tuesday, I did a comedy show. And I was starting to make a little bit of money, but it wasn't going anywhere. I had a glass ceiling. So then I came back to Boston, was a laborer for about a year back in Boston. Then when and actually, you know, I'm into being a writer. I have a lot of self-published books. I've got over 100 books published. It's mostly about history.
Right.
But this was my obsession. I was starting to think I don't want to be a comedian anymore. I'm open-minded about it, but I really want to be a sports writer or a history writer, freelance writer. That's what I was into. And then Bill Campbell calls me. You know Bill, right? Yeah,
I have had Bill on the podcast.
Yeah, he calls me up out of nowhere, and he says, this was June of '78. He says, there's a club downtown. It's a comedy club. It just opened up a month ago. I told him all about you. Why don't you come down? And he said, don't worry, you're not auditioning. They'll pay you. I told him who you are, and that you have a strong act, and you can come down and just do your act. And they're waiting for you. And sure enough, I went down, and I did a set. It went very good. And
now, was that the Ding Ho?
No, the Ding Ho didn't come around until late '79.
Okay.
So the Connection owned the world of Boston comedy from June of '78 to the fall of '79. It was just they were the only game.
Okay.
And they expanded into the Springfield Street Saloon, which became the Ding Ho. But originally it was a satellite room of the Comedy Connection. And then when the Connection made a decision to say, we want a better clientele, because they were spoiled in the Charles Playhouse. It was all, theater, people living
Upper class, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was classy. And then the Springfield Street Saloon was a saloon. And they said, let's go to another place in Cambridge that's a little more classy. And they moved to a place called Eugene's on Mass Ave, near what used to be, I don't know if it's still there, 100,001 place, the arcade. And it was ritzy, but the setup wasn't good. It just wasn't good for comedy. You know how it is. Yeah. You walk in the room and well, we can do the show and it's gonna go okay, but this isn't a good setup for comedy.
Right.
So, in the meantime, Barry Crimmins, who had been a bouncer at the Springfield Street Saloon and was also doing some comedy, said, "Sure, I'll take over the Ding Ho. You guys want to move to Springfield Street Saloon? That's fine." So Crimmins took over the Ding Ho because they left.
Oh.
And Crimmins kicked ass there for 7 years.
Okay, now were you there the legendary night where the Tonight Show came, and I guess one of the producers, his daughter was checking out colleges, so they set up a night, and as we all know, Stephen Wright, he got chose to be on the Tonight Show. But were you on that show that night when he came out to look at all the comics?
No, I wasn't on that show.
No, well, what do you remember hearing about it? I mean, was it But Bill Campbell told me nobody really took it serious. He said he had to work that night, so he didn't go. So I was like, really? That shocked me. But I mean, what do you remember about the buzz?
I have no memory of it. It had nothing to do with it.
Oh, nothing. No, yeah. Well, Tony V said there were like a lot of other shows that night he could jump on to make some money there because all the big name comics were over there at that. But what are your memories of the Ding Ho? What do you remember about the place?
It was another club to me. It wasn't a real. I'm not a drinker. I never did the snow, and frankly, it was just another club to me.
And that was common back then, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, that was the '70s. I mean, you walk into a comedy club, it's almost thrown at you, right?
Well, cocaine was dominant in those days, and I never touched it.
Right.
So, and I wasn't a drinker. And if I was in between girlfriends, that's another story. I'd hang out all night.
Right.
If I'm single. But I usually had a girlfriend, and so, I was famous for being the guy that walks into the club with a history book, and as soon as the show's over, he's out the door.
Right. So you were smart about it, okay.
Well, it wasn't. It was mostly because I'm into studying.
Right.
Even to this day, when I go to a show, I can't wait to get out of there because I got plans on what I want to write about and study. I want study time when I get home.
Yeah, that's why I do the podcast. I'm fascinated with the history of comedy. That's why I started out just a little thing to entertain myself, and it's turned into bigger than I ever thought it would ever turn into. But so now back in the '70s, it's not like today where there's bowling alleys or comedy clubs, and this is I mean, if you wanted to go for it, like you said, you had to hit the road to LA or New York to really try and make a go at being a big time comic, right?
I walked in off the street several times and asked the bartender, "Can I go on stage when the folk singer takes a break and pass the hat?" And they always said, "Sure,"
Oh, there you go.
And a couple of places said, "You were really good. Let's have you come down and do a regular paid set sometime." A place called Samuel's in Burbank, a place called Arbuckle Flats in Portland, Oregon, a place called Luigi's in Austin, Texas.
It was enough to keep you going, right? You weren't getting rich, but it kept you in the game, right?
Just barely. I mean, I was still doing crappy jobs on the side,
right?
But it was mostly because I had to do it.
Do what you got to do. Yeah.
You're not going to spend your whole life getting ready to do this and then not do it.
Right.
So it's like the momentum was already inside me, and I'm not even making a mental decision to do anything. I'm on automatic pilot. I want to be a comedian, and I know what I have to do. And there was a couple of times in LA where I had great sets at the Comedy Store and the Ice House, but I didn't have a place to live.
Right.
I'd walk out, I'd knock it out of the park at the Ice House, and then I'm walking around the street going, let me see how much money I got. Let me see. I think the Salvation Army only charges $6 a night.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that forever. And I eventually hitchhiked back to Boston.
Okay. That's what Jay Leno said. He used to sleep on the sidewalk behind the Comedy Store. He gets on his set, everybody left, he'd sleep on the sidewalk, wake up the next morning, and all right, let's do it again.
So where did you start out? Where was your first gig?
Jerry Caruso. He gave a class at the local college. I always wanted to try comedy. I never knew how. I was like, put in a job application. So I got the pamphlet from the local college, Introduction to Stand-Up Comedy. I said, I'd always wanted to try it. I said, I'll try it. I'll look back years from now. Yeah, haha, I tried comedy. And I took the class. One thing led to another, and I've been having fun ever since. I never stopped. So
my best book, I'll just mention one book. That is my best book. It's called Who's Who in World War II. It's 130,000 words, and I've been working on it for many years. It's available on Amazon. Who's Who in World War II by Mike Donovan. The book is fabulous. It's got everybody. The Russians, the Spanish from the Spanish Civil War, the Americans, the Germans, the Japanese.
So you're covering the history of everything in that book.
It's a history of World War II as seen through the eyes of biographies. But it's really good.
Okay, so you're a history buff.
I would stand by.
All right, so I mean, you're a published writer too. You've been in what? The Patriot Ledger, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, Sports Collectors Digest.
I've had about 10 or 12 freelance articles published, which gives me confidence. But I was on WBZ radio for 7 years as a studio guest, but I logged 200 hours on WBZ in the studio, talking strictly history, very little comedy.
Really?
And so, but the main point of that is that gives me confidence. I mean, I'm a college dropout. Who would trust this guy to write a good history book? Well, I was on WBZ for 200 hours as a historian, taking phone calls from all over the country, and nobody ever made me look stupid. And people used to call in and say, "This guy's really good."
So you knew your stuff.
So I wasn't making money on BZ. I was an unpaid studio guest.
Okay.
But the experience gave me extra confidence that I'm okay as a historian. I'm pretty good.
Okay, now you're a sports guy too. You wrote for Sports Illustrated for a while. How'd you land that gig?
I did an article about a catcher. Did you say you're from Central Mass area?
Yeah, Gardner, Fitchburg, Leominster area. Yeah.
Do you know the Brookfields?
The Brookfields don't ring a bell off the top of my head.
All right, it's just to the west of Worcester, and I was researching an article about this catcher for the Boston Braves who killed himself and killed his family in 1900.
Oh boy!
And somehow somebody I knew at Sports Illustrated got wind of the story, and I got a phone call out of nowhere from SI. Next thing you know, I'm working on this story for Sports Illustrated. But I also did play-by-play in upstate New York. I did high school football.
Okay.
I did radio.
So they came looking for you then?
They came looking for me.
All right, so you're making a name for yourself.
Yeah, I was my official credit was a reporter, but I also supervised the writing.
Okay, so I mean things are starting to take off for you. I mean, obviously somewhere along the line you're a headliner now, and I mean you appeared the Sahara in Las Vegas, the Tropicana Atlantic City. I mean, what do you think was the turning point that turned from this guy making no money to all of a sudden you're a headliner playing places everybody dreams of playing as a comedian?
Yeah, well, it was that phone call from Campbell. They just kind of. I was a little exhausted from trying. I went over to the ground round in '77, and the guy was negotiating with me for a show. He's listening to my tape in the back room. And he goes, "You're really funny. But you know what? I got to tell you frankly, Mike, Boston is not a comedy town."
Really?
Yeah. So I got that a few times, and after being kind of exhausted, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm just going to keep, taking my day jobs. And I'm going to work on my freelance writing And if comedy works out, somebody, calls me up, I'll take it. But I wasn't pushing it anymore.
Right.
For the first time, I wasn't pushing it anymore. But next thing you know, it came to me.
It was meant to be, I guess.
They called me up. They invite. Imagine getting an invitation that's out of nowhere saying, "We're going to pay you. You're not auditioning. Just come down and do a paid set."
Wow.
I say, "Sure."
So they must have seen you somewhere.
Yeah, I found personally that if you push for gigs, it doesn't really get you that many more gigs.
Right.
My feeling was just make your act so damn good, so funny, that people will call you. Make your phone ring. Be so funny that you will force your telephone to ring. That was my strategy.
It's good advice. Yeah. A lot of comics ask me, how do I get a paid gig? Be funny. That's how work will find you with it.
Yeah, be so funny that people are going to start talking about you and calling you.
Right. They can't follow you. So is that what happened in Las Vegas and Atlantic City? They just started calling you because they heard about you?
Yeah, somebody called. Actually, that happened. Joey Santagate from the Comedy Connection was he was like a manager. He wasn't booking he occasionally booked the room, but he was like a manager. And there was a cancellation in Atlantic City, and they needed someone. And so he called the guy up in Atlantic City. I said, "I got the guy for you to fill in." Mike Donovan. So next thing you know, so that was kind of a lucky break, and I ended up doing 20 years.
And word starts traveling. All right. So you got some television credits here too. So I mean, I'll say them and tell me what you're. When stand up stood out, what do you remember about that?
I'm in the movie, but I didn't do. I know you're a comedian, and I don't mind doing podcasts for comedians. But when people want to do me on camera talking about the old days, I always decline.
Really?
I just don't like the look of it. When I see these shows on TV and the old timers are talking about the old days, I just don't like that look.
Really?
I don't mind talking on the radio.
Yeah.
But I don't like the look.
The young kids, they love that. Geez, it's a very popular with the young comics, that's for sure. That's why we're lucky enough to do what we do now, because of what you guys did back then. Yeah. So, all right. Call Me Lucky. What do you remember about that?
Well, that was the one I made an exception because I know Goldthwait, and he's always been nice to me, and Barry was my best friend, and I just said I'll do it. But Goldthwait knew. He said he was. Usually when you're invited to be in a movie, the person isn't thanking you. You're thanking the producer for having it.
Right.
But in my case, they're like, no, he doesn't like to do on-camera interviews. He doesn't mind radio, but he doesn't like on-camera interviews. And I said, I'll make an exception. He said, Goldthwait was really, thank you so much for doing this. And he should have been. I don't mind him being thankful because I didn't want to do it. But I love Barry Crimmins.
Right.
And they were happy to have me, and they used me in the movie. But I usually don't. I often, when stand up stood out, I never watched it.
Really?
I never watched it.
Wow.
And Call Me Lucky, I watched most of it, but I didn't watch the whole thing.
Really?
Because the video imagery is very strong. It creates a different world.
Right.
I want one world. I want the world in my head of how I saw things. I don't want this second definition of what happened, which the medium of video is very powerful.
It can change your words, right? Yeah.
And it could just change the way. It would change the way I remember things. I want only one memory, and that's my own.
It's a good policy, sure. All right, let's see. The Blake and Sal Show. What do you remember about that?
So what show?
The Blake and Sal Show?
It might be. I don't remember that.
All right, wasn't memorable. Nesson Comedy All-Stars.
That was a lot of fun. Gary Gilmore. Not Gary Gilmore. That's the guy that was executed. Gary Gulliman.
Okay.
He was the host, and they invited me. Barry Katz, who was a really good guy, and he was an agent for Gary, and they invited me on. It was down at the Connection at Faneuil Hall. It was a pretty easy crowd.
You're a big sports guy, right? So that was right up your alley, I imagine.
It's perfect.
All right.
It's perfect. Yeah, I love sports, but I love poking fun of the things I don't like about sports. So it's almost like a negative. Yeah, I'm kind of criticizing, like, the way that
what
the
you see,
commercialization of the game. Let me do my best bit. You turn on the TV and all you get is this commercialization. One down here in the Pringles ninth inning. Johnson looks in, gets the Citgo sign. Here's the Pepsi pitch. There's a Sears ground ball to shortstop. The Pizza Hut flip to second. The Valvoline toss to first, and it's a McDonald's double play.
Too much advertising going on.
Yeah, but that's an example of how I love sports, but the theme of my sports material is what's wrong with sports that ticks me off.
But that's what's funny. Your point of view, yeah, that stuff's that. You just want to watch a game. You don't want to have everything jammed down your throat, right?
They're upstaging everything with these. Nowadays, you turn on the ball game, all you get is the color man dominating everything. Right. And when I went to broadcasting school, there was they had it all split up correctly. There's the golden throat and the wooden throat. The golden throat is the play-by-play man. He dominates, and the wooden throat, the ex-player, comes in with an occasional comment, and that's the way you do it. But now the color man talks 90% of the time.
They don't want to listen to what you got to say. They want to tell you, right?
The play-by-play man just interjects something in between the monologues by the color man.
Right.
Maybe I'm the only one that's bothered by this, but
if you're sitting at Fenway, I know the big Coke bottle. Most people are trying to get a picture with the Coke bottle rather than watch the game. It's like, you're here to see the Sox. What are you doing?
Well, the best. This was a letter to the editor for the Herald long time ago. It doesn't even matter who they were talking about. The guy says, these guys never shut up. If these three people sat behind me at the game, by the third inning, I would change my seat.
Right.
And I believe that's absolutely true, at least for me. It's like, first couple of innings, well, is it interesting to sit behind these guys that are so knowledgeable? But by the fourth inning, I got to get out of here. They never shut up.
It's an experience, especially Fenway, the old-time park. All right. I guess the one you best remembered for, the one everybody admires you the most for doing, the best damn sports show period with Tom Arnold. What do you remember of that?
Well, everyone was nice to me. It was a good experience. The John Sally, who used to play for the Detroit Pistons, I'm just a little wired to begin with. I'm fidgety, I'm nervous, especially if I got to perform. So he mistook that as I was really scared. Right. And he put his arm around me, and he was really nice to me. He said, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine." And I kind of laughed because I'm not really scared. I'm just fidgety, But it was really that's my best memory.
John Sally, he tried comedy for a little bit, didn't he?
I think you're right.
I think he did, yeah.
And then this other guy, Kevin Kennedy, who managed the Red Sox, was also on that show.
It was very popular. I mean, you were on in the Tom Arnold days. That's the most popular, of that show, yeah.
Yeah.
So were you friends with Tom or no?
With Tom? No, but he was super nice to me. I didn't know him personally, but he was super nice to me. And Kevin Kennedy, the manager of the Red Sox, in between the commercial breaks, on 2 or 3 occasions, kept coming over to me and go, "That thing you did about the commercial, that was great."
Right. So praise from people you admire. You can't beat that. All right. So you were on Comedy Central, I guess. What do you remember about that?
Comedy Central, yeah, that was 88. The Showtime special.
What was that gig? Just your comedy?
Yeah, it was 88. And what pissed me off was I killed with this opening thing. I open the show, the crowd's packed, and I come on, "Hey, so you can't put another person in the room. The TV cameras are here." I would just like to say that all the people who ever gave me shit in high school, I walked up to the camera and I gave it the finger and I said, "Fuck you, I'm on national television." And the place went nuts. And then they cut it out. They took it out.
Well, you can't put that. Well, I guess Showtime's paid television.
You could swear. You could, the swearing was allowed.
Right.
But then the Globe writes up that Mike Donovan opened. I don't know what he was thinking. He opened up the show by giving the finger to the camera.
So you thought it was one of your best moments.
Represent what I did. I didn't just open the show and walk up to the camera and give it the finger. I did a very clever joke about how tough life is on the way up. when people don't believe in you, and you're nobody in high school, and all of a sudden it was a funny joke.
And they took it out of context, right?
They took it out.
Oh, all right. So, well, here's one that interests me because I manage an Asian food restaurant during the day and I do the comedy at night. But you headlined the Chopsticks comedy tour in Beijing, China. How did that come about?
Actually, that came about because my wife was an extra on a TV show that was being filmed in Providence, and she ran into Tony V, who was an actor on the same show. And Tony mentioned, hey, now I got you, I got a problem here. I was scheduled to do this tour in China, and I can't do it. I don't know who's going to take. You think Mike would want to do it? And she said, yeah, I think so. So just like Atlantic City, I've caught some lucky breaks along the way.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened.
Right place, right time. What do you remember about the tours? I mean, did they speak English over there? Did you ever have to explain a joke, or did they get the references?
Yeah, no, it was expatriates, they call them, the people that are living in China, but they're not from China. It was all English speaking audiences.
Oh, okay.
But they loved me because I spoke a little Chinese. Ni hao ma, that means how you doing? Long time no see.
So you fit right in.
The guy introduces me. This guy I'm going to bring on stage now. He's the only comedian that's ever been here that actually speaks Chinese. You ask him after the show, he'll write down Chinese words for you. Let's hear it from Mike Donovan. So that was my intro. They were just thrilled that this Anglo-Saxon guy from the States comes in and speaks Chinese.
So it was mostly a good experience for you then. It wasn't a tough gig or nothing.
The crowd, I was afraid. The show I did in Beijing was a very enlightening show for me because they say almost everybody that comes to China for the first time gets sick. And my voice was shot. I couldn't do voices.
Yeah.
And that's all, like, going back to the beginning of this conversation, that was my forte, was voices.
Right.
And so I'm like, I have to do 45 minutes in a gigantic nightclub in Beijing, and my voice is completely shot. All I have is my words.
Oh,
I don't know how I'm going to do. And I did very good. I had them in the palm of my hand. I would have done better if I had my voices.
Right.
But that has served me well for the rest of my life. That was about 20 years ago. And now whenever I'm nervous about a show, because maybe I'm under the weather or whatever, I just remember, Mike, remember Beijing.
Remember Beijing. There you go. You learned your lesson out there.
You had no voice. All you had was your words.
Right.
And they loved you. So
that was a good memory.
That helped give me confidence.
There you go.
And then the other one is just being from Southie. It wasn't easy for me. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't a tough guy. And I had, and I got through Southie. I made it okay. I stayed out of trouble. Had a few fights when I absolutely had to. But I thought it was a difficult experience getting through that. And whenever I'm getting ready to go on stage and I'm thinking, this is going to be tough, I'm getting kind of nervous. Just, Mike, you survived Southie. This isn't as bad as that.
Right. Calm yourself down, right? Because you've been through the wars, right?
Yeah.
All right. So you already mentioned your book, 101 Stories About American History. It's available on Amazon and I believe eBay too, right?
Yeah, I have 100 books, but the two best books that would easily be recommended would be 101 Stories. I went through all my other books and I collected the best stories.
Right.
So it's a highlight reel from other books.
Okay.
And it's had very good reviews on Amazon. It's got about 9 reviews and they're all good. And the other one, of course, is Who's Who in World War II.
So you're real history book. You also got a CD, Throwing Rocks on CD Baby they can purchase, right? What's that about?
It's a little collection of clips over the years. It's about 5 years old, so some of the new bits aren't on there. As you know, CDs aren't really,
Yeah, they're a thing of the past. Internet's everything now. CDs are a thing of the past, right? But
but that was fun. My wife helped to produce it, and I made my money back and then some. So it's just nice to have it as an anchor, so just to say that you were here.
So I guess, well, podcasts are the next thing in comedy taking off. Like I said, I started this one for myself. When I hit hundreds of listeners, I was happy. I started to hit thousands of listeners. I'm like, what's going on? And 5% of my listener base is in Israel. Figure that one out because I have no idea. But I hear Israel, they're using,
Really?
I have no idea why they're tuning me in over there. But I hear they're using comedy over there to bring peace to the Middle East. That would be something. But if you want to talk about a guy, what's that?
Wow, they'd like my book on Lyndon Johnson because I have an extensive chapter on the USS Liberty.
All
That
right.
was an American ship that was attacked by the Israeli Air Force, and it's a mystery to this day.
Shout out to
Why
my
they did
Israel
it.
listeners. Look that up. Absolutely. But if you want to take a guy who's taking the podcast to the next level, I guess it's Joe Rogan. He's into the millions of listeners. And I know he was a Boston guy back in the day, and he does remember working with you. Do you remember working with Joe?
Oh, sure.
What do you remember about him?
He mentions me a lot. Well, I mean, he was hard to follow from the time he started.
Really? Is that
strong.
good? Yeah.
He didn't start off weak and then grow strong. He started off strong and then got better.
I remember I found an old picture of the Boston Herald, and Dick Doherty had his comics appearing, and it was Joe in this 80s blazer, and it was just so funny seeing him look like that back then. But I had to ask because he cracked me up when I was listening to one of his podcasts. He talked about, he says, there's a comedian, Mike Donovan, he only works the East Coast mainly, extremely funny. But he said he was working with you one night, and there was a comedian who was doing a joke about Richard Nixon eating ass. And he said you were laughing so hard you couldn't even catch your breath. Do you remember that happening? Or
no?
Oh,
but there was one day I was in the kitchen at the Comedy Connection, and I walked into the kitchen. I was working at the Comedy Connection. I walked into the kitchen. There's 5 comics there, and they all started imitating my laugh to me at the same time. So I used to laugh a lot more than I do now. People started making fun of me for laughing too loud. Right. Like, okay, I'll keep a lid on it. Okay, party poopers. Who am I bothering?
Right. All right, so we talked about how you started. We talked about what you've done. I mean, what's in the future for Mike Donovan? Is there anything you'd like to do before your comedy career is over, or anything left you want to accomplish?
I'm mostly looking to keep producing my books. I've got a different book on every presidential administration. I have 45 books.
Right.
So and I don't think anyone's ever done that. So you name the president, and I can show you the book. I can hand it to you. So, Rutherford B. Hayes? Here's my book called The History of the United States in the Time of Rutherford B. Hayes. And I just hope to get enough gigs here and there to not throw away a career and a great credit. Right. That would be foolish. But I'm not looking to work every weekend. I'd like to work, 2 or 3 nights a month.
Right.
Keep that credit strong, keep that reputation intact, but spend 90% of my time working on my history books.
Do what you love to do in life. You never work a day, they say, right?
No, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it can be much. I remember I had like in 2 weeks, I had 7 shows. I was like in Maine, Rhode Island. I was all over the place. This is too much. I love comedy, man. Just all the travel and the time and working a full-time job. It'll get to you.
Right. The travel is a big one.
Right.
I hadn't done a show during the pandemic. I went a year without a show. And then when I took the first show after a year, I'm commuting. I'm like, this is the worst part of it. The 90-minute, this 80-mile commute.
The drives and the travel and the planes. And all right. So I guess we're getting toward the end here. Let's get close to wrapping it up. You get a lot of young comics that open up for you. Are there any young comics that you admire that we should keep an eye out for?
Well, Will Noonan is a great comic. He has a really, he's not only a strong act, but, there's a Crimmins called it an inner dog. There's everybody has an aura,
Yeah.
There's an aura to your act. It might be completely different than who you are off stage, but there's a spiritual aura to your act. There's too many comedians who I feel that you just get a feeling like you need to take a shower after they're done. Yeah. Not just because they're dirty, but they're mean.
Right.
And they're taking audiences and they're exploiting the worst instincts in their audience. And so, like with the point being, Will Noonan, he's not only strong, but his act has a nice aura.
I asked most of the veteran comics. His name's popped up more than anyone, so he's really making a name for himself.
Yeah, he's a good person.
All right, Mike, last question I got for you. You're a veteran. How long you been doing comedy for now?
I've been doing paid comedy for 41 years, I guess. What's 46 years.
46 years. All right. A young comic comes up to you. He says, Mike, I love comedy. I really want to make it in this business. Can you give me some advice? What advice would you have for that young comic?
Good question. I say never ask the audience to laugh at something that didn't make you laugh when you first thought of it. You don't say, this will work. Let me write this down. This will work. If you're not giggling in the shower, I can't wait to do this on stage.
Right.
If you're not doing that, don't do it. Tear it up and throw it out. Because that's the extra magic. When they know that it comes from the heart, it comes from the gut, and that you know this is silly, you know this is fun, and you can feel it coming from the comic, then it's a different type of bit.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can get away with reciting 30 minutes of jokes and get paid gigs. But if you wanted to have the magic, you got to go with what you really thought was funny when you thought of it.
All right.
It's got to pass the shower test.
Great advice right there from a comedy legend. I love it. Okay. Well, Mike, I want to thank you for being on Funny Like Clown podcast. I wish you luck in the future. Great career. And you're one of the comics I admired when I started. So thank you for all you've done for comedy.
All right. Thanks. I hope to run into you sometime soon.
I hope to work with you again. We'll see you soon, Mike. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Comedian Mike Donovan, legend of Boston comedy. And I remember before I started doing comedy, I actually went out to a comedy show and Mike Donovan was headlining that night. And I was just blown away at how funny this, for a local comic, I mean, how funny this guy was. He should have been on a national stage. He really is that funny. I mean, and that's why some of the comics that have reached the national stage, like we mentioned, Joe Rogan, they refer back to Mike Donovan because that's one of the guys you admire, man. You want to be like Mike. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. Laughter is the best medicine, folks. Tell somebody a joke. Make them laugh this week because laughter is a fun thing to do, and try to bring someone up. Don't put them down. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.